restless searching, my heart was hurting, my mind was turning, wanting something more. Just behind it, somehow blind, I could never find what I was searching for. No satisfying, though I was trying, knew I was lying just to make it through. This was the life I knew, till the day I found you. Now I can celebrate every day on my way, 'cause I found you. Now I see the love I need, finding me when I found you.
I'm a proud Canadian. Toronto's my hometown. I love the people, the diversity, the culture. It's also home to one of the world's largest gay populations, and with that, one of the largest gay pride parades. It's a big draw for people of all cultures and demographics, both gay and straight, and even our Prime Minister, who in 2016 was the first world leader to march in one. And of course, it also draws out the awkward protesters.
If you can't stop sinning, if you were born that way, then you would have something to argue with God on Judgment Day. But the Bible...
Homosexuality and Christianity. Two opposing viewpoints, each defended by millions of people who think that the other side is completely wrong. But after experiencing life in both the gay community and the church, I found that there is a way that we can dialogue on this complex topic that is honest, respectful, and doesn't lead us to making unfair assumptions about the other.
Celebrate every day on my way, 'cause I found you. Now I see the love I need, finding me when I found you.
Okay, everybody ready? Here we go.
I never thought people would want to hear what I have to say, but I've spoken now to audiences across Asia, a few across Europe and Brazil, and many all over North America. I'm not trying to offend anyone, but I've learned over the last 10 years that there's no simple way to talk about homosexuality and Jesus without some people feeling offended. Yet I've also learned that the best way to get started is to tell the story about how I found Guy. Yeah, my house was right here. This was my neighborhood, and a lot of things happened in our home that no kid should have to experience. Yeah, it's emotional. It's emotional coming back here again. There are a lot of beautiful places in Canada that should definitely be on your bucket list. The city of Windsor, on the banks of the Detroit River, probably isn't one of them. When I was growing up there in the 1970s, it was a gritty industrial city loaded with Ford, GM, and Chrysler auto assembly plants. My father was the preacher at the local church. We tried to project the image of the perfect Christian family, but behind closed doors, something completely different was going on. My dad had suffered with numerous illnesses, the most debilitating being the migraine headaches that he suffered with every day. When I was around 8 years old, I became his caretaker at home, so my mom could work longer hours in local diners and grocery stores in order to help make ends meet. That same year, I was sexually molested by a man. He was a trusted friend of the family, someone I had known my whole life. When it was over, he threatened me not to tell anyone, and I didn't speak of it for 27 years. It was a disorienting and confusing event that has brought on several complications of which I've struggled with for decades. But that was only the beginning of the struggles I experienced in that house. Over those years, my mom involved herself in numerous adulterous affairs. It was not uncommon for me to wake up in the middle of the night and watch her sneak out of the house to get in some strange man's car and be gone for hours. I have memories of my dad and I driving through the city late at night, going from apartments to hotels, trying to find her to bring her home. When I was 11, I came home from school one day and found a suicide note that my dad had written out. Fortunately, I was able to call 911 and get help in time. 2 years later, my dad and I were traveling down a dark highway in the middle of a blizzard. I remember the driving snow to be so thick we could hardly see outside the windshield. And as he screamed and cried uncontrollably, he pulled over on the shoulder of the highway to let me out because he said he was going to crash the car into the side of a bridge and kill himself. When he stopped the car to push me out, I grabbed the keys out of the ignition and refused to give them back until he promised to get us both home safely. Not too long after that, he spent some time in a psychiatric hospital, and upon his release, he left my mom and me and my 3 baby sisters. He eventually returned months later, and life went on. I could go on and on. I don't blame all of my problems on my parents. They weren't horrible people, and these terrible decisions they made then isn't the sum of their lives, but I hope it does explain, even in a small way, why I made some of the terrible decisions that I made that I'm responsible for. I never woke up one day deciding to be attracted to the same gender. It's just something I discovered. It was just there. I was a preteen when I first realized that I was attracted to guys. One afternoon, as a friend and I walked home from school down an alleyway near my home, he introduced the idea of us trying some sexual things together. That kid became my boyfriend, and we carried on a relationship that lasted for years. During that time, I was confused and lost, consumed with shame. I remember so desperately wanting to tell someone what I was experiencing, but I didn't know where to turn. At school, I heard kids throwing around gay, fag, and queer jokes. At church, the only message I heard my father and others preach on homosexuality was how gay people were wicked and evil and going to hell. And then there was home. My dad made it real clear how disgusting it all was to him. One night, my dad and I were watching TV together, and something came on the news about homosexuality. I'll never forget how my dad yelled out in anger. Then he stood up and threw his slipper at the television and left the room. I remember lying in bed at night, looking up at the ceiling, considering how little the world seemed to think of me, unsure of what it was I had done to be the center of everyone's hatred. And what about God? Didn't he see me? Didn't he care? Why was he letting me go through all of this?
So I don't want to take any more time. Without any further ado, Guy Hammond.
All right. The building that you're looking at is of a gay bar in New York City in Greenwich Village. It's called the Stonewall Inn. It's probably one of the most famous bars in the world. The day that I was there, sun was shining, blue sky. There's a little park across the street where moms were playing with their children. And little would you know that an event took place at this bar 47 years ago that to change the whole world. This is a picture of the Stonewall Inn in 1969. It was a gay bar back then as well. Of course, back in the 1960s, very few establishments welcomed openly gay people. There weren't very many places for them to go, but of course, gay bars were one of them. But police raids were very routine. And on June 29th, 1969, the police raided the Stonewall Inn. But things quickly got out of control. And the patrons inside started fighting against the police. And word spread out around Greenwich Village that this was taking place. So people amassed at the location, and a riot ensued. And so people started rioting. In fact, the riots continued for several evenings. And these became known as the Stonewall Riots. It was after these riots that the gay community in New York City got together and created their very first activist group. And it is from that group that was born what we know today now as the gay rights movement. And the gay rights movement has really turned into a global movement, hasn't it? In the last 47 to 50 years, has had tremendous impact in our world today. I mean, it has affected our politics, our educational system, what we watch on television. They've been well-funded, well-organized, and done an amazing job getting their message out, haven't they? Well, there's another world organization, something that started about 2,000 years ago. It was started by a man called Jesus Christ. We call it the church. And you see, Jesus started the church, and it's been a global movement. It has affected the lives of people around the world for thousands of years. And all of us have been affected by this global movement. You see, what's been happening, though, for the last 50 years is that these two groups, the gay rights movement and Jesus' church, have been going like this. We've been arguing against each other. There's been no reasonable conversation. We've been mad at each other. We've stereotyped them, and they have stereotyped us. And I would like to think that there is a way for Christians to be able to dialogue on this within our communities, with our neighbors and friends and the people that we care about, in a way that doesn't lower the biblical sexual ethic and also lifts up the love, mercy, and compassion of Jesus. Now, I would like you to know, I'm a person who likes to have all the answers. I have to admit, on the things that we're going to be talking about this afternoon here in Denver, I don't have all the answers. The truth is, on the issue of homosexuality, same-sex attraction, sexual identity issues, I myself have to be willing to live within the tension of uncertainty on the things we're about to discuss. So, listen, let's talk a little bit about who Guy Hammond is. And, why am I here in Denver talking to you kind folks? Well, this is me when I was 16 years old.
During my teen years, home was not a happy place to be. So I spent a lot of time with my boyfriend. I felt safe there. Growing up, though, I always felt really awkward and uncomfortable around guys. I just didn't understand the world of men. On the outside, I worked hard to make my life look happy, to be funny and popular, but inwardly, I was in a lot of pain. I prayed countless of times in tears, begging God to take away my homosexual attractions. But he never did. When I was 18 years old, I moved to Papua New Guinea to spend a year and a half doing Christian volunteer work. I thought, if I devoted myself to God's work, then maybe he would take away my attractions to guys. And New Guinea at the time was one of the most primitive places left on the planet. It was an unbelievable experience. I hiked through the mountains and jungles and went to places that few Caucasians had ever even been to before. I learned the language, taught in their schools, volunteered at a local hospital, helped run a first aid clinic. I also began a great friendship with two other Canadian volunteers, Barb and her husband Mike. I had a good, normal relationship with Mike, but I was too embarrassed to tell him what I was really running away from. During that time, I just kept praying and hoping that God would make me straight. Well, I returned to Canada almost 2 years later, a lot thinner, with a lot of cool stories to tell, but within a few weeks of getting off that plane, I was back in the arms of my boyfriend. I was still very attracted to men. I felt God had let me down again. Where was he? Didn't he see what I was going through? Didn't he care? So what was I to do with God and the church now? When I was 22, I moved to Toronto. By this time, I had been with my boyfriend for 10 years. We loved each other, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fill that gaping hole in my heart. So, in an attempt to find fulfillment, I started crossing some dangerous lines by having anonymous sexual encounters with men I met in places like the change room at my local gym and parked cars and known gay hangouts. Now, this is not how all gay people live their lives, but living like this for me just became routine. There was a mall close to where I lived, a known spot where guys would meet to have sex. I would stand waiting for the next willing person to come along, sometimes for hours, waiting, all for just the chance to act out with some guy, even just for a few brief minutes. Meanwhile, chaos still reigned with my parents. I was so angry that one day I traveled back to Windsor to the home of one of my mom's boyfriends and threatened to kill him if he ever came back to my parents' home again. I was serious. I would have killed him. I never saw that man again. Looking back, considering all the time I wasted, the hundreds of hours I spent trying to find love, find connection, find significance, it was such a waste. I both needed and detested what I was doing, all at the same time.
If you're from the gay community, I want you to know how glad I am that you're here today. You would certainly disagree with me on some fundamental issues. And then this is also a very emotional issue, isn't it? We all feel differently on the issue of homosexuality based on where we grew up, based on past experiences, or our friends, and so we all come from different places. You may not all end up agreeing with the things that I'm going to be talking about today, but that's okay. Here's the one thing I think that we can all agree on, though, and that is this. Every person needs to be treated with dignity, kindness, and respect, regardless of what they're attracted to, regardless of how they decide to live their lives, regardless of their response to Jesus in the church. I would like to think we all agree completely. I think one of the greatest gifts God has given mankind is the ability for us to be able to choose how we will live. And so with that in mind, I actually support the rights of gay and lesbian, transgender people to pursue their dreams and live however they want. I don't think it's my business. At the same time, though, there are others of us who have the same rights to choose differently. There are some people who believe that living a gay life is not compatible with their values, and so they've decided to choose a different way. And I would like to think that we could respect each other's rights to be able to do this. Now, we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff here that isn't real popular. I've actually spoken at events on university campuses especially where I've been protested against. There's been signs and banners and rainbows and buttons and people yelling and screaming, and there's been local press. And, actually I also seem to be in the unenviable position of having everybody mad at me because I've spoken at churches and Christians have gotten up and walked out because they didn't like the stance that I was taking on some of the things they were discussing. But I don't know what it is about you Americans. You guys get hyped up about everything. I got to tell you, your politics, your sports, your everything. You guys are just hyped up all the time. Honestly, watching from Canada, looking down to the south of the border, you guys, you know what we call you guys? The crazy states of America. We do. We do it with love, though. We love Americans. We think the United States is Canada's greatest 11th province. We're so glad to have you. And so I'm hoping after our time together today, we'll come up with some new ways of being able to talk about this issue so that we can have a greater impact in our communities.
Back in Toronto, I eventually reached the point where I was seeking random sexual encounters almost on a daily basis. Amidst all of this, an old friend invited me to visit a church that he had found. My first thought was, man, I know all about church. I know how fake it is. I know how judgmental those people are. It's not safe for someone like me. Besides, how could I go back now? But I knew I didn't have the strength to keep living as I had been. So I went, hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, this church was different. Well, the first time I went, I was amazed. The preaching of the Bible was so powerful. The people there were just genuinely honest about their lives, their challenges, their weaknesses. No pretensions, just normal people trying their best to live according to the Bible. And believe it or not, At that same church service, I just happened to run into my old friends Mike and Barb that I hadn't seen in years from Papua New Guinea. Apparently, they had moved to Toronto and had just happened to find this church a few months earlier. I thought, maybe here I could finally get some real help. And over the next several months, I was reminded why Jesus is so amazing. His love, his compassion, and how he decided to give his life up for me. The men at the church taught me, for the first time, how to actually follow Jesus. And I really tried, but I was too ashamed to tell anyone that I was gay. So I secretly promised God that I wouldn't act out with other guys anymore. So I white-knuckled it. I tried really hard. But without the support I needed, it wasn't long before I was back at it again, standing around that stupid mall, hooking up with guys, all the while pretending to be someone else at church. And it was during this time I even dated a girl from the church just to be normal, try to be like everyone else. I thought maybe it would help bring about some change in my life.
So I remember meeting Guy back in 1985, and he was so much fun. We spent lots of time together, we had a blast together, and we even dated for a while. So after a few months, it became obvious that he was pulling away from people, he was very disconnected in our relationship, and really no fun to be around at all. So I ended the relationship. I broke up with him.
I don't blame her. My life was so messed up then. Even when she and I were dating, I was secretly having sex with anonymous men. I was living a double life, and it was only a matter of time before the emptiness in my heart just consumed me.
You know, a lot of times, unfortunately, it's turned into an us versus them mentality. Either the gay community thinks it's us versus the Christians, or a lot of times the Christians can think this is us versus the gay community. I recognize that there is going to be a large segment of people in our world today with whom we will continue to disagree on the issue of the traditional biblical sexual ethic, and particularly on the issue of homosexuality. But why is it then that we have to stay separate from each other on every other issue? One of the ways I think of crossing this bridge, of being able to join the two groups together, would be that we recognize that there are other things in our society today, other concerns and other issues that we as Christians and as homosexual people are genuinely concerned about. And there's a lot of them. I've got just a few mentioned here, but feeding the homeless. I don't care if you're gay, straight, Christian, non-Christian. Who doesn't want to feed the homeless? Can we not come together and agree on that issue and work with one another to be able to do so? What about third world development? Who wants to argue about that? What about bullying and helping kids in schools who are being bullied? We can help with this, can't we? Okay, you may not agree with me on the biblical sexual ethic. I don't think homosexuality falls in line with what the Bible teaches, and you don't care. Okay, we disagree on that. But we can still be in relationship with one another. We can still be friends with one another, and we can still work together on the things we do agree on to come together and help one another to be able to make a change in our world today. Is there a genetic cause for homosexuality? Wow. Boy, that's a huge question, isn't it? I'd like to give you the best answer that I have on this. The American Psychological Association, which is a very pro-gay leaning group, came to this conclusion in 2009, and this continues to be their stance on this issue. They say, although much research has examined the possible genetic, hormonal, developmental, social, and cultural influences on sexual behavior, no findings have emerged that permit scientists to conclude that sexual orientation is determined by any particular factor or factors. The American Psychological Association. Science is yet to prove definitively that genetics plays a role in people becoming homosexually attracted. Are people born this way? I don't know. If somebody comes along to you and says, no, there is a study, I read it, I would suggest you ask them to see the study. And it needs to come from somewhere better than yahoo.com. Right? Because the truth is, science has yet to prove this definitively. So we don't know yet. I will tell you, though, as a same-sex attracted man, I'll tell you it feels very natural to me. As I said when we started this evening, I never chose to be attracted to the same gender. It's just something I discovered at a young age. It's all I've ever known. It's like my skin color. It's not something I can turn on or turn off. It's just who I am. I didn't choose my skin color. I didn't choose what I'm attracted to. How much of it is nature? How much of it is nurture? I don't know, but this is how it feels. So it feels very natural to me, and when people say, I feel like I was born this way, I understand. But I would like to suggest this. For the Christian, I don't know if it matters. That is because our ability to choose actually supersedes our genetics. I was at an event in New York City a few years ago when somebody spoke up in the middle of the event and challenged me because in the animal world, there is homosexuality. See, animals don't choose anything. They just live on instinct. But see, I'm not in the animal world. God has given you and I this incredible ability to be able to choose how we will live. And so even if science does prove that homosexuality is a genetically based trait, okay, I don't know why that would matter. Our ability to be able to choose supersedes our genetics. And so I choose to live differently. I choose to live differently.
After 2 years of attending that church in Toronto, my double life had exhausted me. And by that time, I'd had sex hundreds of times with different guys. One day, one of the ministers who had studied the Bible with me noticed that I wasn't doing well, so he invited me over to his home to see how he could help. How could I tell him of all the things I was involved in? I knew that if I were to follow what the Bible taught on sexual morality, that meant that I could never romantically be with another man again. As we talked, I knew I couldn't continue living both lives. I had to pick one and then move on with my life. I remember leaving that minister's home, choosing homosexuality over Jesus. I had finally made my choice. That was it. There was no going back. I went out to the street and got on the next city bus to take me home to begin the rest of my life as a gay man. That was a 20-minute bus ride that changed my life forever. The thought that kept running over and over in my mind was, Guy, you know that Jesus died for you. How could you turn your back on that? And the more I thought about it, I knew I couldn't live the rest of my life knowing that I'd turned my back on a man who was willing to die for me. And that night, I read my Bible, I prayed, and I cried more than I had ever cried before. My heart was broken, and I was finally surrendered. I knew I wanted Jesus more than anything else, and I was ready to sacrifice whatever I needed to in order to follow him. I knew it would be the struggle of a lifetime, but I was finally willing to do it. Besides, following Jesus provided forgiveness and heaven, two pretty good fringe benefits of the plan, things homosexuality could never deliver. The next day I returned to that minister's home, and I got completely transparent with him. He was so compassionate and understanding and believed that I could change. And over the next few weeks, I learned more than ever before that Jesus was not only willing to forgive me, but also set me free. On August 15th, 1987, I became a Christian. And while my attractions to men didn't change, my heart and actions certainly did. And I had finally found God, and the hole that was in my heart was filled. Little did I know that God was preparing me to find even more in life. And I was baptized on August 15th, 1987, and I can tell you that I have not participated in any kind of homosexual activity since my conversion 28 years ago. What God wants us to do is to strive to live holy lives and glorify and honor Him with our lives, and that's what I'm striving to do every day, and I just trust and believe that God's grace is sufficient. Okay, what we're going to be talking about next is just going over some of the basics on dealing with the issue of homosexuality, and let's start here. I'd like to be able to talk a little bit about terminology. Words are important, terminology is important, and what I say may not be the same thing that you would say, and we may not understand each other. So let's start with this. What is the difference between people who say that they're gay and homosexual versus people who say that they're same-sex attracted? Well, people who are gay and homosexual are people who use that term to be able to describe themselves. It's an identity marker to them, and most often homosexuality is not a moral issue to them. So it's something that they celebrate, it's something that they want people to know about,
and they identify themselves as somebody who is homosexually attracted. Then there's people who are same-sex attracted. I never use the term homosexuality or gay to describe myself because I don't want to infer something that isn't real. You see, because I do not celebrate my same-sex attractions. This is not something that I identify myself with. Jesus is my identity. He's the one I've decided to follow, and I don't want to be known as a person who is homosexually attracted. There's so much more to my life than that. And so I don't use those terms to describe myself. I don't celebrate homosexuality, I don't participate in homosexuality, and I haven't now for 28 years. But I have to use some kind of terminology to be able to describe who I am, and so for that purpose, I say that I'm same-sex or I'm same-gender attracted. So, let's talk a little bit about what the Bible actually teaches about homosexuality. You know, we really doesn't talk about it that much. We really only get 5 scriptures. You'd think on an issue this significant and important, we would get more passages than this, but we don't. We only get 5. There are a few other scriptures mentioned throughout the Bible, for instance, on Sodom and Gomorrah and whatnot, but these are the main 5. And even though we only get 5, there's a lot we can learn from them. But let's read one of them. And here's what it says. Don't you realize that those who do wrong will not inherit the kingdom of God? Don't fool yourselves. Those who indulge in sexual sin or who worship idols or commit adultery or are male prostitutes or practice homosexuality or are thieves or greedy people or drunkards or abusive or cheat people, none of these people will inherit the kingdom of God. That's a long list, isn't it? There's a lot of things in there. Homosexuality just being one of them. So we can see that the Bible clearly states that homosexuality is not a part of God's plan for human sexuality. Now that's not a real popular message today, but it's significant that these 5 scriptures are written in both the Old and the New Testaments. It's important to recognize that these 5 scriptures are written years apart by different authors to different audiences and different cultures. See, a lot of times people will say, oh, Guy, that was written thousands of years ago. Are you kidding? That can't apply to 2016. Yet in reality, it does because these scriptures were written thousands of years apart. A lot of times people will say, well, maybe it's a cultural thing. But you see, no, because these scriptures that were written to different cultures and different audiences. So it is true, actually, from Genesis to Revelation, that God makes it clear that when it comes to human sexuality, his desire is that it be reserved between that of a man and a woman bound together only in marriage. And not one time is homosexuality talked about in a positive light as something that should be emulated. Now, as I said, that's not a very popular message today. I don't know if it ever will be, but that is the biblical sexual ethic, and certainly that is the stance that I take in my own personal life. It's what I understand the scriptures to teach.
When I became a Christian, my whole life was starting over, and it was great. The church really protected me, loved me, and I built some amazing friendships. And I knew that my life had to change in dramatic ways if I was to stay faithful and not go back to homosexuality. I needed to start living my life on purpose and establish some self-imposed boundaries. There were certain places I just couldn't go back to, activities that I could never allow myself to participate in again. I was also finally honest with my struggles and temptations with my old friend Mike. One of the most difficult costs to count in becoming a Christian was that I could never be romantically involved with another man. But I knew that I didn't want to spend my life alone. So how was that going to be possible if it had to be with a woman? I mean, I'd never even been attracted to a girl before. And when I dated Kathy years earlier, she's the one who broke up with me. But I couldn't get her out of my mind. If I was ever to have a partner in life, I knew she was the one. So I started praying daily. God, I know I don't deserve this, but please, God, keep Kathy for me, and I promise that I'll love her like no one else can. I prayed that prayer hundreds of times for over 2 years. Then one day, I finally opened my mouth.
We were at a singles retreat when Guy asked me out. And everything in me screamed, no, I can't do this again. In fact, to this day, I'm sure I said no. But he carried on as if I'd said yes. And so a little while later, we met for coffee, and we knew this time would be very different.
So soon we started dating again. And we loved going on long walks, sharing our dreams, going to ball games, hockey games, out for dinner, the movies. And of course, we both had this deep desire to follow Jesus. I mean, she'd become my best friend. Even though I knew I wasn't attracted to Kathy the way a heterosexually attracted man would be, I knew I loved her and couldn't imagine living my life without her. As our friendship escalated into engagement, I knew I had to tell her about my situation. It was a pretty scary moment. I was afraid, of course, that she would reject me, and who could blame her?
When Guy first told me about his past, I was sad. Sad that he had been lonely and that he'd carried this secret for so long. But then I felt betrayed, and I got angry, and I was fearful. What if he was marrying me as an experiment? What if we could never have a normal physical relationship? What if he had AIDS? And for me, the biggest one was, what if he decided down the road that he would rather be with a man? At that point, Guy had not acted out in over 2 years. So I had to ask myself, if he's this committed to righteousness, do I really care if he's attracted to men or if he's attracted to women, as long as he's being faithful to me? And that was the point I realized, I love this man and I can trust that he will continue to be a spiritual man.
We both decided then and there that we would refuse to allow my same-gender attractions to be something that would define our relationship. Our wedding day was incredible. I'll never forget standing there at the front of that church as she walked down the aisle. As the congregation stood and the music played, I thanked God then and there for answering my prayers. Now, I understand that many same-sex attracted Christian men and women will never want to marry, and I respect that choice. It's not for everyone, but for Guy Hammond, marrying Kathy was the greatest decision of my life.
I think a lot of times for us as Christians and in the church, whenever we talk about the issue of homosexuality, we can talk about it in the context of something to oppose. But I would like to suggest that when we talk about homosexuality, it's in the context of people. We're not talking about an issue, we're talking about human beings. The majority of gay people that you work with, go to school with, live in your communities or in your families are just regular folks. They want to go to work, they want to go to school, they want to contribute to their communities. They don't want to fight, they don't want to argue, they don't want to insult people. And so I think it would be helpful for us not to make assumptions and to judge people, because when we start looking at groups of people like an issue, it makes it into an us versus them situation. And there is no us versus them. Listen, we're all in need of Jesus. We're all in need of forgiveness. We're all in need of mercy, right? And so there's no us versus them. You know, one of the terms that we can often use, and I've heard this a lot, is this term, love the sinner, hate the sin. And I would like to put before you that on this particular issue of homosexuality, that is probably not the best line to use. Because when somebody in the gay community hears a Christian say, I love the sinner, but I hate the sin, the only thing they hear in that line is the word hate. A Christian comedian and author, Mark Laurie, here's what he says: how about love the sinner, hate your own sin? He says, I don't have time to hate your sin. There's too many of you. Hating my sin is a full-time job. How about you hate your sin, I'll hate my sin, and we'll just love one another. Right? That's probably a better way for us to be able to deal with this issue, isn't it? The Apostle Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 12. He actually says there, what business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Now he goes on there to say we should judge those inside the church, but it's interesting that Paul says, what business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Well, what does that word judge actually mean? Well, the word actually means to approve or disapprove. That's a really interesting statement there that the Apostle Paul makes. What business is it of mine to approve or disapprove of anything people in the world who aren't Christians do? I'd like to use sports as an analogy. Of course, I'm Canadian, and about the only thing we do in Canada when it comes to sports is play hockey, right? Now, we do have an NBA team, and they're, the Toronto Raptors, but, we have a casual following in Canada. I mean, it's basketball. How hard can it be to bounce a ball and walk at the same time? Honestly, I don't understand it. Hockey is a much more difficult sport to play. I think you'd all agree with me, right? Wow. Okay, see, I knew there'd be some protesters here tonight. Okay. Did you know that actually basketball was invented by a Canadian? Did you guys know that? That's true. You're welcome. It's true. Did you know that a Canadian invented cable television? That's true too. I apologize. So, anyway, that's actually me sitting on the bench at the Air Canada Centre where the Toronto Maple Leafs play. But you know what? That's about as close as I'll ever get to playing professional hockey. Wouldn't it be weird and strange if the Toronto Maple Leafs started judging me for not playing? Like, let's say the next game they have coming up. At the end of the game, they're all looking around the dressing room, and one of the players on the Toronto Maple Leafs says, "Where's Guy? I mean, why isn't he here tonight?" And the players go, "Yeah, I can't believe he's not here." I mean, if they started judging me and talking bad about me because I didn't play in that game, that would be a strange thing to do because I'm not on the team. I never signed a contract, and I can skate, but not good enough to play with them. And so that's weird to judge me for that. But let's say they were actually desperate enough to want me to come and play, and they said, "Guy, would you come and play for the Toronto Maple Leafs?" I would say, "Sure." And see, they would give me a contract, and I would read the contract, and if I agreed to the terms and conditions, I would sign the contract. Now I'm on the team. And so if I didn't show up at the next practice or the next game, see, now they have the right to judge me. They have the right to look around the room and say, "Where is Guy?" Because he signed the contract. You see, if you have a gay couple come to church, it might be easy to want to look over and judge and think, how can they live that way? But if they're visiting with us, listen, what we want to do is be able to give them the opportunity to read the contract. So let's study the Bible. Let's learn about what God has to say about this. And over a period of time, we would build relationship and do so with an open Bible. And if they came to a point in their lives where they decided they wanted to give their life over to Jesus, they would become Christians. See, now they're on the team, and Paul says, well, in that setting, yes, we do have the right to judge one another, to walk side by side with one another and help each other live successfully as Christians. But for us to do so with people who aren't Christians, listen, they never agreed to the biblical sexual ethic to begin with. Why would we expect them to?
Seven years after marrying Kathy, I actually became a minister at that church in Toronto. And over the next 15 years, we got the incredible opportunity to serve and teach hundreds of men and women in churches across Canada. As we learned to counsel people from all walks of life, I was determined to be transparent and honest with them about the sins in my own life and the temptations that I faced. But the one thing I could never discuss was my homosexual past or that I was still attracted to men. Even though I hadn't acted out in over 2 decades, besides telling Kathy and a few trusted spiritual advisors, I was simply too embarrassed and ashamed to talk about it. And just the thought of talking about it brought about fear. Actually, dread is a better word. There was nothing that caused me more self-loathing and regret than the fact that I was attracted to men. I found it completely humiliating. I was in a mental prison. For years, I had this recording going off in my head that was just on repeat. And the message was, "Guy, what's wrong with you that you can't change this? You're a loser. You're a failure. You're disgusting. You're dirty. And if people knew who you really were, they would never love you." As I look back, it was an incredibly lonely and exhausting way to live.
For the first 15 years of our marriage, we were happy, we had fun together, but it was obvious Guy was still filled with a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. I knew he was having struggles, but he would never talk to me about them. This was an area we just could not communicate. If I ever brought up the subject or asked how he was doing, he would sometimes shut down completely for days. It was as if he'd gone into a black hole or a cave.
I felt like I wasn't fulfilling my role as a man. I absolutely had joy in my life as a Christian, and our marriage was fulfilling, but I just couldn't seem to get past my same-sex attractions. It was just so difficult.
At one point, Guy came to me and said, "I have something to tell you, and I think you need to be sitting down to hear it." And I thought, oh my goodness, this is it.
I wouldn't wish anyone to go through what I've experienced. There's been a lot of really painful and difficult chapters in my life. I grew up in Canada. Home for me was not a happy place to be. My dad suffered with severe physical and mental health challenges, and my mom involved herself in numerous adulterous relationships for over a decade. While all this happened behind closed doors, we pretended to be a happy Christian family every week at church. During this time, one of my friends introduced me to homosexuality. I never decided to be attracted to the same gender, it's just something I discovered. That kid and I carried on a relationship that lasted for 10 years. They were years that were filled with shame and embarrassment as I tried to find love and find significance. I constantly begged God to take away my homosexual attractions, but He never did. I eventually left God as a young adult, and my emptiness led me into seeking random sexual encounters with men that I met at places like my local gym and public restrooms. In the middle of all this, one day, someone invited me to a church. I reluctantly went, believing that all Christians were just fake, and besides, how could God take me back? But it was there that I finally found what real love looks like. It took me over 2 years of attending that church before I finally decided to leave my life of homosexuality behind in order to follow Jesus. And to this day, I'm still attracted to men. But I believe God has given everyone the ability to choose how they will live. And I've never looked back. 2 years into my Christian journey, I started dating a girl from the church. We had an amazing time together, but I knew I couldn't hide my past from her forever. One day I told her everything. I was afraid, of course, that she would reject me.
So I had to ask myself, if he's this committed to righteousness, do I really care if he's attracted to men or if he's attracted to women, as long as he's being faithful to me? And that was the point I realized I love this man and I can trust that he will continue to be a spiritual man.
Finding Jesus and finding Kathy was unbelievable. Little did I know that God was planning for me to find even more in life. Seven years after marrying Kathy, I actually became a minister at that church in Toronto. And over the next 15 years, we got the incredible opportunity to serve and teach hundreds of men and women in churches across Canada. As we learned to counsel people from all walks of life, I was determined to be transparent and honest with them about the sins in my own life and the temptations that I faced. But the one thing I could never discuss was my homosexual past or that I was still attracted to men. Even though I hadn't acted out in over 2 decades, besides telling Kathy and a few trusted spiritual advisors, I was simply too embarrassed and ashamed to talk about it. And just the thought of talking about it brought about fear. Actually, dread is a better word. There was nothing that caused me more self-loathing and regret than the fact that I was attracted to men. I found it completely humiliating. I was in a mental prison. For years I had this recording going off in my head that was just on repeat. And the message was, Guy, What's wrong with you that you can't change this? You're a loser, you're a failure, you're disgusting, you're dirty. And if people knew who you really were, they would never love you. As I look back, it was an incredibly lonely and exhausting way to live.
For the first 15 years of our marriage, we were happy, we had fun together, but it was obvious Guy was still filled with a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. I knew he was having struggles, but he would never talk to me about them. This was an area we just could not communicate. If I ever brought up the subject or asked how he was doing, he would sometimes shut down completely for days. It was as if he'd gone into a black hole or a cave.
I felt like I wasn't fulfilling my role as a man. I absolutely had joy in my life as a Christian, and our marriage was fulfilling, but I just couldn't seem to get past my same-sex attractions. It was just so difficult.
At one point, Guy came to me and said, "I have something to tell you, and I think you need to be sitting down to hear it." And I thought, oh my goodness, this is it. This is the affair. This is the thing I didn't know about. He started the conversation by sharing with me that he was very discouraged because he had spent the first 15 years of our marriage trying to be heterosexually attracted. He had tried everything. He had studied things. He had prayed and prayed and prayed. He really was apologetic. He was afraid that I was discouraged, that I would be let down somehow, that he was not being the husband that he should be to me. And my response honestly was, what? That's what you've been trying to do? That's where all the guilt and the shame and the discouragement have come from? I had no idea. That had never entered my mind, that you would ever be heterosexually attracted. And I don't care. I love you, and I've lived all these years knowing you're same-sex attracted, and it hasn't mattered.
After that talk, I decided that I would no longer allow my insecurities to hurt our relationship and to allow painful secrets to carry on. I even told her about how I was molested when I was 8. She was the first person I had ever told. I didn't realize it then, but as our communication deepened, my weakness was finally becoming my strength.
You know, it took me, as I said, 2 years to go to church to hear the message. 2 years of learning about God. 2 years of building relationships with Christians. For me to finally get to a place where I felt like I could be transparent and vulnerable enough to tell them who I really was. But it took 2 years. Thank goodness those Christians were patient enough to let me be there for 2 years, instead of putting on some time frame to say, well, if he doesn't have everything figured out in the first few weeks or the first couple of months, he's out of here. You see, my question is, can we be secure enough in our own faith as Christians to have people who are at different places along their spiritual journey worship with us and give them the time and space they need to be able to ask questions about the Bible and about sexuality and the different things that they're working through in life? A lot of these things aren't going to change in a matter of weeks or even months. Sometimes it's going to take years for people to make the changes they need to. You know, there is a difference between acceptance and approval. And a lot of times we think, well, if I accept these people, if I hang out with these people, if I spend time with these people, if we let these people in the church for a long period of time, that will just mean we're approving of things. But there is a difference between acceptance and approval. You see, the whole beauty about Jesus was that he was able to be around people and accept them even though he didn't approve of how they were living. I'm not suggesting we don't teach biblical truth. Let's be honest about the truth. Let us be honest when we don't have an answer. Let us be honest when the answer is not popular. But let us also radically serve and love and welcome anyone, even though we disagree.
One day in the summer of 2006, I got a call that changed the direction of my life forever. A fellow minister invited me to speak at a conference in the U.S. about homosexuality in the church. I was stunned. Did someone tell this guy about my past? Well, actually, no. He simply thought that because I was a Canadian, I would have an interesting perspective on the matter. The whole idea just terrified me, so I immediately refused. I had hidden for so many years, I was forced to ask myself, what exactly was I hiding from? So I used to be gay and was attracted to guys. So what? My wife loved me. I had good friends who loved me. Jesus loved me. Who cares what anyone else thought? I then began to think about all the other Christians who lived outside the heterosexual mainstream, who felt as lonely and as isolated as I did. I began to think of it as a calling to reach out to them, letting them know that they weren't alone. And over the next 24 hours, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I was in turmoil, battling my fears and insecurities. But I went from not being able to even speak about my predicament to contacting the organizer and telling them that I would accept his invitation. I'll never forget the night before the event. Tears just streaming down my face. I was petrified and excited, all at the same time. Was I really about to stand in front of a group of strangers and come out of the closet? The lesson I gave that day was strained. I stumbled and struggled to get the words out, but with the help of God, I did it. It was the most terrifying and exciting day of my life. Over the next 7 days, I called my mom and relatives and told them for the first time that I was same-sex attracted. One of them disowned me and refused to talk to me for over a year. It was challenging, but I knew I had to keep speaking. A few days later, we started strengthinweakness.org, an online ministry devoted to helping same-sex attracted Christians like myself. Its purpose wasn't to try to convert people from homosexual attractions to heterosexuality, but offer resources and an online community to help them not feel so alone. I thought, if I could just find 30 Christians to help, then the website would be worth running. But we actually found 30 in the first week. Not long after that, it went past 100, then 500. From there, the ministry just exploded. I mean, I couldn't keep up with the sheer volume of people from all parts of the world who were contacting me for help. This issue was much bigger than I ever imagined. And I finally realized that God had a plan for all of this brokenness and heartache that I had experienced. I now had a new mission in life.
And so we should be able to be in relationship with people, be hospitable with people, spend time with people with whom we don't approve, but of whom we absolutely will accept. This is not a stance that equals liberalism, that says you can live however you want, nor is it a stance that equals conservatism, that says you have to have everything figured out and live exactly how we think you should live before we'll let you in. It's just a posture that says we recognize that these realities are very complex and very difficult. And you're going to need time to figure these things out. I think when we live like this, we're going to be going much farther in our ability to be able to reach people. You know, the Apostle Paul gives us some tremendous examples throughout Scripture on this. The one I'd like to share with you actually here is in Acts chapter 17. You know, when Paul went to Athens, he wasn't planning on actually staying very long. He had to wait for Timothy and Silas to catch up. And so let me just read a portion here. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see the city was full of idols. I think it's important for us to recognize how Paul felt, because we feel the same thing when we look at our culture today. You see, when Paul saw the idols, he was greatly distressed. One version I read the other day said that his spirit was provoked within him. I know how you feel. When you turn on your television and you see a gay pride parade and there's a bunch of guys on there in their underwear and you look at that and you go, what on earth is happening to my country? What is happening around me? And it's easy for us to have our spirits become provoked within us. I have felt the same way at times too. But see, the Apostle Paul gives us a tremendous example of how we should respond when that occurs to us. Because in the very next verse it says, so he picketed and protested and yelled and screamed No, actually, he didn't do that, because the next verse actually says, so he reasoned. How do you reason? Well, you tell me what you're thinking and I'll listen. And then I'll tell you what I'm thinking and hopefully you'll listen. He reasoned. He was able to be with people with whom he didn't agree. And he was willing to take time to talk with them. And as the story goes on, it tells us that some of these people called him a babbler. This guy's out of his mind. What is he talking about? He's a babbler. Forget this guy. Other people, though, as you go through the story, said, I've never heard that before. Really? I think I'd like to hear you some more on this issue. And then some of those became Christians. You know, on this whole issue of homosexuality in our world today, let's be honest. If we have hopes to bring these people to Jesus, it's a tough sell. And you know, talking about becoming a Christian, really means that we're going to be talking a lot about self-denial and living lives of restraint, which are not really great advertisements for Christianity. I think if we can reason with people, if we can sit down and talk and hear them out and hear what they've experienced and try to understand the challenges that they've been through, if we can be compassionate and non-judgmental and say, I'm not going to rush to assumptions, I'm not going to rush to judgments about you, this is going to be a safe place for us to talk. Our church is going to be a safe place for you to be able to ask these kinds of questions, and we're willing to be patient. It could be months, it could be years, but that's okay while you do so. This will be a safe place. I mean, even if they decide to leave and they all say you're crazy and they call you a babbler, okay? Then let them call you a babbler, but then let them leave saying, I didn't agree with those people there at that church in Denver, but wow. There was no group of people who were more loving, more compassionate, and more serving than them. I didn't leave homosexuality at the time that I did because I believed it was so bad. I left homosexuality because somebody was able to prove to me with an open Bible how much better Jesus is.
After starting Strength and Weakness Ministries, several churches, faith-based groups, and schools asked me to come and speak on the issue of homosexuality. Every experience was unique, but I'll never forget the very first time someone invited me. It was in 2010 in New Jersey. A Christian group at Rutgers University had learned about my ministry and wanted me to give a 2-hour presentation at their college campus. I was so excited that I agreed without giving it any thought. Little did I know that news of my visit was about to go viral, and not in a good way. 1 week prior to the event, I found out that a gay rights group on campus had been proactively trying to shut it down, even ripping down the posters. Apparently, they assumed I was going to spew a message of hatred and bigotry. When I found out, I started feeling pretty anxious about the whole thing. When I arrived at the event, there were angry protesters everywhere. The Christian group that invited me only had about 30 members, but the 200-seat auditorium was completely packed. The tension was so thick that when I began to go around the room to introduce myself to people, many would even shake my hand or look at me. As I gave my presentation, to my surprise, the audience was very respectful, but I could sense that I really wasn't winning anyone over. And I'll never forget this one woman who sat in the front row. She spent the whole 2 hours just staring me down. I mean, if looks could kill. And by the time I had finished my talk, I could feel the tension growing, so I quickly thanked the audience and walked away from the podium. And just then, someone stood up and shouted, "We were told you'd be here till 9 o'clock, and it's only 8:30, and I have a question." I reluctantly turned around, went back to the podium, and answered her question. Then quickly, dozens of hands shot up. The room got louder. Some people started shouting. Some were booing. I could quickly see that I was losing control of the situation. So I just pointed at random to one of the hands at the back of the room. The woman stood up. She introduced herself as the president of the LGBT organization that had planned the protest. She said that she wasn't interested in becoming a Christian, but that she had never heard this side of Christianity before. She said that if my message was true, then it was a message that the whole world needed to hear. She then thanked me for coming and told everyone in her group to put their hands down. There was no longer any need to argue, and that was it. No disruption, no attack, no security needed. As the night came to a close, many of those who would not even shake my hand earlier came to meet me and share their stories. The lady with the big jacket also came up to me, and with tears streaming down her face, she gave me a big hug and thanked me.
You see, there is a way for us to be able to dialogue about this issue, to reason with people, to treat people that we disagree with dignity, kindness, and respect. You see, you can't spend all your time telling everybody about how amazing Jesus is by telling them about everything that you're against. And I think one of the challenges is sometimes we're not convinced that Jesus is that amazing. We have to be convinced that Jesus changes lives. You know, how do we convince somebody to go from living a gay life and to considering Jesus? It's tough. You have to consider, we're asking people to leave a community that they feel very safe in, to come and consider something that is very different to them. So another way of trying it would be following the example of the Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 17. I don't judge you for the fact that you're involved in homosexuality. I don't judge you for that. You'd be a welcome guest at my church. I want you to come and learn. It's a safe place. We're going to give you time to figure things out. I'm going to be your friend. I'm going to care about you. I'm going to give you time and space to figure these very complex realities out in your life. Would you be willing to sit down with an open Bible once with me? Would you be willing to come to one church service? I'm not asking you to change your whole life now, but I'm telling you, Jesus is way better than anything else. Would you be willing to give Jesus a try? You see, there's a way to be able to dialogue with people where we just don't knock everything we're against, but we actually spend our time lifting up Jesus and talking about how amazing Jesus is. We can't always tell people how amazing Jesus is by telling them everything that we are against.
By 2011, Kathy and I were devoting 50 to 60 hours a week to our day jobs as ministers at our local church, while simultaneously devoting another 50 to 60 hours a week to running Strength and Weakness. And we were also constantly receiving questions that we just simply didn't know how to answer, such as women's issues and transgender issues. We were living on such little sleep and were on the verge of exhaustion. So we started praying and begging God to send people to help us.
For as long as I can remember, I wanted to be a girl. And at age 16, I started living as a woman. I dressed as a woman. I changed my name to Desiree. I took hormones. I went all the way and had a sex change operation. I became sexually active with men and women. And I lived as a woman all through college. I had everything that I wanted. But for some reason, I just couldn't shake a feeling of emptiness that I still had inside. I always envied people that I knew who claimed to have faith. It seemed like they had a higher purpose, a higher calling, and I just did not have that. I had never really had any concrete faith in God. I really identify as agnostic, and so I had never really given the Bible a shot, never really read it. And so I did. I started reading God's Word, and it just spoke to me as the truth. I mean, it was really profound. It seemed like everything that I'd always searched for was right there for me. What I saw in God's Word is that He creates us all very specifically and very lovingly, with specific purposes in mind. I saw that He creates us male and female. I could not reconcile it within myself that He would intend for me to live as a woman when He so clearly created me as a man, no matter how natural that felt. So I decided I would find a church to go to. I wanted a church that was serious about the Bible, and I heard about one from a friend and showed up one day as a woman in a skirt and heels. I started forming relationships very quickly as a very warm, friendly church. No one felt the need to question me at all. They just treated me as I presented myself, as a woman. Some of the women there invited me to study the Word of God. As we started to get into it, I started to just feel more and more convicted that God was pulling me to make the decision to live as a man again, which is a decision that I came to on my own. No one had to sit me down and say, this is what you need to do. It was totally God. And I did. Overnight, I cut my hair. It was already down to my mid-back. I absolutely loved it. Totally rocked it, actually. And that's not appropriate. I went to Walmart, got some guy clothes, showed up to church as a man, reintroducing myself as Brandon, my birth name. Very soon thereafter, I was baptized. I gave my testimony in front of the whole church, and I was just welcomed into the church with open arms and love. While I was studying the Bible, I had the chance to connect with Guy Hammond, and he just encouraged me so much. I've been a Christian for nearly 7 years now. Guy stayed in touch with me over the years, and 2 years ago, he asked me to step on staff to create a transgender ministry. Since coming on board with Strength and Weakness Ministries, God has given me incredible opportunities to help people like me. It has been so fulfilling to use everything that I have been through for His glory.
I grew up in a Christian home that was built on the foundation of the Bible. Dysfunction was not something that I was very familiar with. I have 2 amazing parents who loved me unconditionally. It was at the age of 12 that I was introduced to homosexuality. This was introduced through a number of events, one being at a basketball camp, which resulted in a few relationships on my basketball team. It was then after that I entered college. I was playing Division I collegiate basketball and found myself in multiple relationships, sexually and emotionally, with both men and women. This ended up in a whirlwind of confusion and despair. Confusion and despair, as you can imagine, led me to a terrible downfall. It was at that time that I started searching for God. I started looking into different churches in the community, and it was at that time that I found somebody who would study the Bible with me. And I remember the day of my baptism because my whole team, my coaching staff included, my entire new church community and my supportive parents were all there to watch me change my life from living an active lesbian lifestyle to now becoming a Christian. I, as a same-sex attracted woman, found love in a relationship with a man. I informed him of my struggle with same-sex attraction about 6 months into our dating relationship. And because of his faith in God, he loved me unconditionally and showed me so much compassion. Through the grace of God, I have peace and freedom in my struggle to really see Jesus through our marriage. A year after my baptism, Guy Hammond came to San Diego to speak at a conference. I pulled him aside, I told him my story, and he expressed the need for help in the women's ministry. And it was at that moment that I knew that God was calling me to help teach women and help them as well.
Brandon and Morgan are just 2 of the many people that I believe God's placed in my life to help Strength and Weakness Ministries. And I believe there are thousands of other people just like them, men and women who want Jesus, eager to make a difference in this world for Christ. Working together, we're bridging the gap between the LGBT community and the church.
You know, all of us have legitimate needs. These are all given to us, they're inborn, and they're all real. But what ends up happening is that as we live our lives, Satan always is trying to sell us things to make us think that if you do A, B, or C, these things will meet your legitimate needs. But you know, these things don't work. But I believed the lie that said, Guy, homosexuality is the thing that will provide these things for you. And again, this is not just a homosexual thing. People who are involved in heterosexual activity outside of the confines of a man and a woman bound together only in marriage, if you're trying to be able to take care of legitimate needs in that way, I'm telling you, you will be left sorely disappointed. It will not work. It tells us here in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 14, that Satan masquerades as an angel of light. What's an example of that? Well, I love to use this story here in John chapter 4 because I think it clearly demonstrates a trap that we've all fallen into. This poor woman, really had gotten her life into quite a mess. Jesus and the apostles come across her at a well. And the woman offers Jesus a drink. And Jesus says to her, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I don't have to keep getting thirsty and have to keep coming back here to draw water." He told her, "Well, go and call your husband and come back." And she said, "Well, I have no husband." Jesus told her, "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're with right now isn't your husband. What you've said is quite true." Jesus is like, "Yeah, you don't have a husband." You know what? This poor woman, she's done the same thing we've all done. You see, Satan's told her, if you have a relationship with this man here, it will meet all your needs. But it wasn't her husband. And so it worked for a little while, and then it didn't. So she had to go on to man number 2. Then that worked for a little while, and then it didn't. Then she had to go on to man number 3. And then that worked, but only for a little while. And then she went to man number 4. Then man number 5. Now she's with her 6th guy. Jesus is like, "Aren't you getting this yet? It doesn't work." Jesus says, "I have a better way." You see, Satan is always trying to get us to try products that don't work. And then when we try it, he's like, "I can't believe you tried that. Did you actually think that was going to work? You're crazy." We see this in products all the time. I mean, who doesn't love frosting? But do you know really what it is? Yeah, 3 kinds of sugar with oil, with no strawberry inside. Come on, are you serious? What about the next one? No, it's just imitation boiled tree sap made from chemically processed corn kernels with water and aromatic compounds. Oh, you gotta love that. Whoa! Whoa, calm down. What is going on? It's orange juice. You guys take your orange juice really seriously here in New York, eh? Wow, that's incredible. No, come on. Let me tell you what the problem here is. You see, they try to sell us this product by telling us it's never from concentrate. Do you know what not from concentrate means? It means that it's pasteurized. And what happens when they pasteurize it? They take all of the oxygen out of it. And then they store it for like a year before it's bottled. And what ends up happening is when it's pasteurized and all the oxygen is taken out, it loses its orange color. And it's not even orange anymore. And it loses its orange taste. They have to recolor it and re-put in flavor to make it taste good. I kid you not, Google it. It's the real deal, baby. Listen, companies do this all the time. They try to sell us one product, but really it's something very different. But we drink it anyway. It tastes great. It takes away the thirst, but only for a little while, and then it stops working. And then you're thirsty again. Why are we talking about that? Because, you see, that's what happened to the woman in John chapter 4. It worked for a little while, and then it didn't. Then it worked for a little while, and then it didn't, 6 times. Guy Hammond, hundreds of times, hundreds of men. It worked for a little while, but then it didn't. Then it worked for a little while, and then it didn't. You see, Jesus comes along to the woman at the well, and to you and I, he says, I've got a better plan. With no chemicals. I was in Chicago not too long ago, and I was talking about this, and I showed this, and a girl in the audience goes, "Excuse me, water does have chemicals." I was like, okay, I know water has chemicals, but you get my point. Quit interrupting my lesson. Okay. It tastes great and no chemicals. You see, right, this is the difference between sin and Jesus. Sin, it's fun and enjoyable, but only for a short amount of time. Then it's full of pain and leads to spiritual death. But with Jesus, you get true fulfillment, forgiveness without pain, and it leads to eternal life. That's how it works.
Are you a celebrity?
Am I a celebrity? Well, the truth is that no, I'm not a celebrity, but this is a filmmaker and he's making a movie about my life, and he follows me around everywhere I go.
Well, then you gotta be some kind of a celebrity thing if he's documenting your life.
Isn't that crazy?
By 2013, Strength and Weakness Ministries was helping thousands of Christian men and women in over 50 countries around the world. I had written a few books that people were actually buying, and several churches, faith-based groups, and universities from around the U.S. were inviting me to come and speak. And Kathy was also traveling with me and telling her side of the story to audiences. So at this point, it became clear that we needed to quit our full-time jobs as church leaders in order to devote all of our time to this ministry.
It was a scary time, and it was an exciting time. We knew we wouldn't have a guaranteed income, and at that point we really had no funding nailed down. We really just had a website and a dream. One of the ministers in Canada, a good friend of ours, sat Guy down one day and was very concerned.
He asked me, "So you want to do this even though you're 50 years old?"
Guy said, "Yes."
Married, you have a mortgage, a car payment, you'll have no regular income.
Yep.
And you currently have 0 donors. He said, "Are you crazy?" Look, I figured if it's the Lord's will, it's the Lord's bill. So we stepped out on faith and prayed that God would take care of us. And here we are, years later, living mostly off donations. It's been a fantastic journey, but it certainly hasn't been an easy one. Most people don't know that I'm actually a major introvert. Every time I stand in front of an audience, I feel like I'm gonna throw up. And of course, since starting this ministry, I've found so many haters. I've been verbally attacked, laughed at, mocked, protested, threatened, lied about online and in the press. And deep down where no one else goes, I can tell you it's been both a humbling and a humiliating experience. I'll never forget the first email I ever got. It said, "I hate you and your stupid, homophobic, bigoted ministry, and I know where to find you." You know what? Bring it on. I'm not afraid of bullies, and neither was my Lord. I'm not afraid to speak the facts. For example, in 2016, Johns Hopkins University, Bloomberg School of Public Health and Medicine, Arizona State University, and the Mayo Clinic released a 143-page report stating that there is still no conclusive scientific evidence that genetics determines whether someone is born gay or straight. I'm open to the idea that one day they may find a gay gene. But again, for the Christian, I don't think it matters. Our ability to choose supersedes genetics, feelings, and emotions. I remember speaking at the University of Southern Maine where a gay rights group had printed t-shirts with the phrase, "Don't listen to Guy," and was passing them out to students to wear. Now, most students had no idea who Guy was and why they shouldn't listen to him, but hey, it was a free t-shirt. So I decided to turn that phrase into a marketing campaign for Strength and Weakness. I made a website called don'tlistentoguy.com. It's a place where people can gripe and complain and say whatever they hate about me. We've also printed our own line of Don't Listen to Guy t-shirts. You know, everyone seems to have an opinion about Strength and Weakness Ministries, regardless of how much or little they know about it. But I don't need people's approval. Christ is all I need.
My name is Whitney Bowen. I have been with my wife for 10 years and we just got married 6 months ago. I am not a Christian, nor do I prescribe to Guy Hammond's teachings per se. My parents are actually the leaders of the family and parent ministry for Strength and Weakness, and although we disagree in some fundamental areas, we can both agree that it is incredibly important for parents of gay children to have access to resources that allow them to keep their love door open, because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
And I would like to offer this in closing. The Bible talks about pride, arrogance, self-righteousness, and judgmentalism over 900 times. It only talks about homosexuality in a direct way only 5 times. Now I get it. You can't judge the importance of any topic based on how many times it's mentioned in Scripture. The truth is, if we only got one Scripture on being prideful and arrogant, it should be enough to cause us to be people who are humble. And if the Bible only talked about sexual ethics only one time, it should be enough to cause us to be people who are pure and righteous. That being said, I do think it's important to recognize that the score is 900-5. And maybe that reality should cause us to be people who should speak with some hesitancy on these issues that are this complex and difficult. Recognize we don't have all the answers. Maybe have a little bit more compassion and understanding. Recognize that the ground truly is level at the foot of the cross. We truly are all the same, and not just talk about how level it is.
At its core, everything we've talked about is not really about homosexuality. It's not a gay issue. It's a human issue. We're all the same. Homosexual, heterosexual, transgender, whatever. We're all in need of a savior. I believe there are millions of other people just like I was, living their lives, searching day after day to find fulfillment, happiness, and purpose. I believe they can find that in Jesus and the church. We can't let them down. You know, the truth is, I don't know exactly what I'm doing. I feel like I'm building the airplane while it's 40,000 feet in the air. And I know I couldn't continue doing all of this without Kathy. She truly gives me the strength to carry on. We just finished speaking in our 30th city this year. Looks like we're going to miss our connection in Washington and not get home till tomorrow. We're tired. Fortunately, we've only got one city left to go before Christmas. People ask us how Kathy and I are so happily married when I'm same-sex attracted and she's not. It's simple. We believe that love is best expressed when we focus on what we can give to one another rather than focusing on what we can get from one another.
So over the past 25 years, I have just grown more and more in love with Guy. You know, he's always been thoughtful and funny and kind and generous. He values me as a woman. He values me as a wife. And I cannot imagine life being better with anyone but Guy.
Well, love is relational, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's not just physical. And through all of this, we've been able to enjoy life and raise our kids. Wait. Did I even mention that we have kids? Yeah, we do. We have 4. Crazy, right? In 1993, we had our first daughter. 2 years later, our son. And in 2006, the same year we started Strength and Weakness, we decided to adopt 2 more. I love my kids with all my heart. My 3 oldest kids are growing now, and Kathy and I, with our youngest son, now live in a duplex house along with our lifelong friends, Mike and Barb. I'm reminded of my own parents. While they certainly suffered some difficult years in their marriage, I always knew they loved me. I'm also happy to say that they eventually did forgive one another. They remained married until my father passed away, and their final years together were relatively happy ones. When I look back at how messed up my life used to be and see the life I'm living now, it's a miracle. No, seriously, it's a miracle. I'm the most blessed man in the world. Thank you, God. I recently traveled back to that fateful bus stop in Toronto. My life changed forever on that one brief 20-minute bus ride. I got on the bus a homosexual. I got off that bus ready to live for Jesus. That was 30 years ago, and honestly, I've never looked back. So that's my story. My call to everyone is, do whatever it takes to find Jesus. It won't be easy, but I can tell you that Jesus is worth it. Everything else and everyone else in this world will eventually let you down. He never will. And after living a life devoted to finding God, I realize now that I was also finding myself. The largest event I ever spoke at was at a Christian conference in St. Louis with 17,000 people in attendance. But this time I only had a few minutes to speak. How could I possibly summarize everything? What could I possibly say that would convey the enormous challenges that homosexually attracted Christians go through to follow Jesus? Asking God for direction, I knew what I needed to say.
There are thousands and thousands of Christian men and women who live with unwanted same-sex attractions. And we need your help. We need you to remind us that our value and worth to God and His church is not based on what we are attracted to. We need you to remind us that our identity is found only in Jesus and not in the badges that the world wishes to put on us. You know, for the young man we've been helping who lives in a West African country, who's too terrified to even tell anyone in his church that he's same-sex attracted, because in his country, homosexuality is illegal. And so he's afraid that if he's open and transparent about this, not only will he ostracize the other Christians, but he might even be turned over to the authorities and arrested. I put before you, Jesus' church is not complete without him. For the young campus student I was speaking to just last week, who in tears was telling me how difficult it was because the world keeps calling out to him to embrace and celebrate homosexuality. But because of his reverence for the authority of the scriptures, refuses to. I put before you, Jesus' church is not complete without him. And for anyone in this arena who's ever struggled with same-sex attractions from one degree to another, I want you to know, Jesus' church is not complete without you. And God is not ashamed or embarrassed of you. And He wants to use this area of struggle and weakness in your life to go and do something great for Him. Whether your same-sex attractions ever leave you or don't use that as your measure of success. Succeed in loving God. Wait expectantly for the day you hear these words. Well done, good and faithful servant. Not perfect servant, but faithful servant. Now that is true success. Amen.
Still on the journey, every day I'm learning.